thank you for coming. This is our third winter evening of this season. Remember that there are refreshments afterwards, and we gratefully accept any donations to keep making this all possible. Before we get started, I want to remind you that in 2 weeks we have another winter evening. We expect to have Sue Kane speaking on flax and linen, as someone who's worked with it and studied it over the entire globe. So for tonight, when we were to go back a handful of months, I think a bunch of us in the fall had just heard Charlie Nardozzi on Vermont Public Radio speak and have a gardening show, his annual fall gardening show. And somebody said, wait a minute, we've got a couple of excellent people in Tunbridge. We could have our own gardening show. So that is how this all came to be. And these people graciously humored us and willing to come. Wendy Palpy has worked 25 years on this particular farm, Tunbridge Hill Farm on Monarch Hill Road, and was one of the first times I'd ever heard of a CSA. You guys were right at the cutting edge, right?
You guys started. You asked for it.
Well, we asked for it, but I was trying to give you yeah. So, a very early CSA here in town, and so she'll be speaking on veggies, herbs of many kinds. She'll give us a little thumbnail sketch of a few of the basics, but also maybe suggest some neat new things and answer a lot of questions at the end, or answer as many questions as we can fit. Eileen Ahern lives on the other side of the river in Tunbridge, up on Stratford Road, and she works diligently at Dandelion Acres, does lots of landscaping work, and graciously has donated her time doing the flower beds here at the library. So she's a very, very busy lady and is going to be speaking on perennials, annuals, and shrubs, and going to give a few pointers to us to make sure that we give our plants the best shot when we put them in or when we divide them and tend them. So they're going to give us a little bit of wisdom at the beginning and take some of our persistent gardening questions, including ones that may not have a good answer. But I would like you to all give a warm welcome to Wendy and Eileen.
So there's a few ways that you can propagate your plants. And to start with, there's seeding, there's vegetative cuttings, and there's division. Seeding is, we do a lot of plants from seed at Dandelion Acres, and I don't know if you want the lights off. I have a seeding table because tomatoes alone we do about 10,000 seedlings. So each plate goes on a seeding table. What happens is there's a vacuum running. I'll just pour the seeds on top of this and it'll vibrate.
Is that okay?
Yeah, there's little holes. It vibrates. A seed goes to every hole and by the vacuum system, and then I pour the excess off. And then I flip this over, and I have a seed tray, which is what you see seated in the picture. So each hole on my tray corresponds to each cell. And so I'll get one seed per cell, and then depending on the seed, we'll either cover it, or some seeds require light, and they won't get covered. See where we're If you do save your own seeds, there's a quick rule of thumb that it should add up to 100. And so if you're storing them, you want the temperature and the relative humidity in that room or area to equal less than 100. So if it's 50 degrees in that room, you want the relative humidity in that room to be 50% or less. And that's going to give you the most viable seeds over a longer period of time. These These are, once they get going, this is on a germination table, so our seeds, after we seeded them into the trays, they go onto a radiant heat bench, because most seeds want a 72 to 75 degree temperature to germinate. Some have seed dormancies that need to be broken. We do a lot of perennials from seed. Some need to be frozen first. Others need to be put in the dark for a few weeks before they'll germinate. But most annuals and vegetables want to be at about 72 to 75 to germinate. Most vegetables take about 7 to 10 days, same with annuals, to germinate. Perennials, it's different. Some come up in 3 days, some take 3 weeks. Vegetative cutting is usually done with like geraniums, some of your higher, more expensive plants. Some of the specialty petunias, you'll take a cutting off, usually the greener growth, the newest growth, dip that into a rooting hormone, and then stick that into a media, usually a soilless media like peat moss and vermiculite mix. And then root that under a mist, using the mist bench where they're kept moist, the relative humidity is high, until they root out. There are a few things you can do from woody cuttings, and that you take further back on the plant with a kind of a harder stem on it. A lot of the evergreens, you want to take a heel cut or a woody cutting, where you're going to get a piece of that older woody growth. Division is, a lot of perennials are propagated staticky by division, and that's, you're going to dig up your clump and you're going to just chop it. Either you're going to take a machete or 2 garden forks, or if possible you can just pull it apart by hand, and this is going to give, like one clump will give you several new plants of the same variety. Now, growing conditions for plants tends to vary, but what you want to do is know what your soil composition is. Is it sandy? Is it clay? Is it a nice loam? Most vegetables and most of your plants like a nice loam. It holds moisture and it provides soil for fertility. But there are exceptions. Some want it a little drier and they'll take a sandier soil. And there's a few plants that will grow in hard clay, but they would probably really like to be in loam. Your soil pH is also important, and there are little kits you can buy to test what the pH of your soil is. Most plants want to be grown between 5.5 and 6.5, which is slightly acid. There are a few that'll go on the alkaline side, which is over 7. And then there are a number that want to be in a more acid soil, such as blueberries wants to be around 4 or 5. And so if you're having some problems, I would test your pH of your soil first and see where it falls. And then there are ways to adjust it. And to get a more acid soil, you're going to add, usually it's a garden sulfur, and to get a sweeter soil or a more alkaline soil to bring your pH up, you can either use lime, sometimes you can use wood ash, it's harder to gauge. You also want to know the nutrition, what's available to your plant in your soil, and often you'll see on your fertilizer bags those 3 numbers, NPK numbers, that goes 20, 20, 20 or whatever. That is, N is the first number, that's nitrogen, and that provides usually healthy green growth on your plant. P is your phosphorus, and they're recommending lower levels of phosphorus now, just because of runoff into streams, and that tends to promote algae growth. And they're finding our soils have enough available phosphorus in most cases to support your plants. K is potassium, and that's a good promoter of roots and buds. Next is your exposure, sun exposure. Full sun, you'll see these symbols on a lot of the plant tags. There's either a big sun or a sun and half a cloud. The sun is full sun, and that means that that plant wants 6 hours of direct sun a day. The part sun is 4 hours of direct sun, and the shade is usually less than 4 hours of sun and not in the direct hot midday sun. Common problems that in your plants, you'll get a lot of mechanical or environmental damage. Weed whacker makes nice striated marks on your trees and shrubs, or where the lawnmower hit. You'll also find the snow breaking branches, winter kill. And that's where either it was really cold and windy, and the buds usually on the ends of your branches usually burst and dry out. Other problems are critter damage. You'll get rabbits and moles and voles, and well, usually not moles, voles and deer chewing on your plants. Slugs and snails are a problem, especially people who grow hostas. Insects cause a lot of problems, and there are a plethora of foliar diseases and root diseases out there. Usually the first insect you will see that causes you problems is the Asiatic leaf beetle. This is an import from China. The adult is a bright orange, and it lays eggs on the back sides of the leaves. The eggs take about 2 weeks before they hatch, and then out comes this larva, which is actually the green thing on the edge of the leaf, and that'll feed for about 24 days. And all that black stuff on it is actually its fecal material that it throws on its back to make itself inedible. And it's not the only bug that does this. Once it's done feeding, it goes down into the soil where it'll pupate for about 20 days, and then emerge as an adult. And it'll be able to do this life cycle usually about twice up here. There's a couple of different controls out there now. Spinosad, it's a biological disease that targets the insect. It's found very effective on the larva and to some extent on the adult. Some people handpick these things off as an adult. Once it gets to this stage, it's disgusting. Neem oil, which can be found in a couple of products, Bon Neem, I'm trying to think of what the other ones are, can smother the egg masses when they're in that little orange stage. It can also smother the larva. Usually the next problem most people have, is the rose chafer, which comes out at the beginning of June. This is sort of a tawny beetle, and just devours rose leaves and hydrangea leaves and rose flowers, and it usually hangs out for about 3 weeks just eating. There's a couple of controls for that, usually the same as our next pest, which is the Japanese beetle, which usually, just as you think, okay, we're done with the rose chafers, out pops the Japanese beetles, and they persist strongly for about 4 weeks, and then start to taper off. You'll still find some, but the main infestation takes about 4 weeks. And they also feed on a lot of things. They prefer the rose family, but that is not where they stop. These are white grubs, and these are the larval stage of most beetles. Japanese beetle, the rose chafer. You will find these if you ever turn over soil or digging up sod. You will find these all in different shapes and sizes. Most of them are C shape. Unless you have a hand lens, you're not going to know who's who. You have to look at dots on the rear end to know which is the rose chafer and which is the Japanese beetle. You'll see huge ones in your soil. Those are usually your June bugs. But this is a very good time to try to control your infestations. And what you do is you treat your sod or your turf, because that's where they're overwintering. They feed on the roots of the grass. You can either do nematodes, which is a teeny microscopic worm that will feed on them, and also milky spore, which is a biological disease that attacks them. To control the adult beetles, neem oil and to some extent the spinosad has been working, and then also with especially with the Japanese beetles, the pheromone mores, you see the bags, but they also have a little scent that attracts those beetles. It's best to put it on the outskirts of your yard so you are not attracting it towards whatever that it's attacking. These you need to be on the lookout for. Asian longhorn beetle, I don't know if you've heard, this attacks maples, sugar maples in particular, and has been found in the New York City area, and it is a fairly large beetle with very long antennae. We have several beetles that look similar. One is the pine sawyer, but this one has striped antenna. And if you ever come across this beetle, or think you have, please contact the Department of Ag for the state of Vermont. The other one, which they're really worried about because it has been found in New York State, is the emerald ash borer down around Albany. And this is wreaking havoc in white ash trees and green ash trees. It's about this big. It's a brilliant green. It's actually a very pretty insect, but it bores into the tree. You'll see a hole, about a dime-sized hole, a lot of frass coming out, and it just devastates the tree. So again, that's what you'll see. There's a lot of purple, I don't know what they call them, traps hanging in trees. Once in a while you'll see those. That's what they're monitoring for, and they have not found it in our state yet. There's a lot of diseases out there, fungal, bacterial, and viral, and depending on what it is how you go about treating it. Now this is a fungal disease. You probably all have seen powdery mildew. This one's on cucumbers. It's just a white fuzz. A lot of times it's on phlox, garden phlox. It's just a lot of hosts. And there it is. And this also is a fungal disease. This is botrytis, or damping off. If you start your own seedlings, you often see this, in that your seedling just collapses. You get a brown kind of water-stained part to your stem. Usually what happens is there's something in your soil, a botrytis spore in your soil, and it just went to the best thing it could find. This is a botrytis or gray mold on, you'll often find it in blossoms when it's been really moist and humid out. That slide is of a New Guinean patient. This is Pseudomonas on, and this is a bacterial wilt. This one is on a lilac, You will also see this on delphiniums, and they get kind of crinkly and moldy black looking. And this is a hosta with a virus. I don't know. Is that in focus? The leaves get really crinkly. It looks like it's some kind of exotic sport, but it actually has a virus and it can move to other hostas. So what you want to do if you find this, you want to dig that one up and toss it. Most viruses are pretty hard to eliminate because they are intercell. A lot of the fungal and bacterials are easier to treat because they're usually on top of the leaf surface or on the lower leaf surface, but they are not in the cell itself. There are exceptions. To avoid fungal and bacterial problems, you want to start out with healthy plants. And then you can also select disease-resistant varieties. A lot of times you'll see on the bottom all these letter codes, like VT, FT, and what they mean is they're either fusarium tolerance is high, or they've been bred to resist verticillium wilt. Then you also want your soil to be healthy, and that means it's not compacted, it's not overly wet, it has the right pH, it has nutrition to it, and then watering is key too. You don't want to overwater it, you don't want to stress it out by underwatering it. You don't want to leave water sitting on the plant overnight. And air circulation is key also. This is going to help dry it out. If you do get water on your plant, the air is moving around, it can help dry. And then good sanitation, and that's once you got moldy stuff, get it out of there. Some of it you can compost, but a lot of it, if it's viral, you want to throw it out. And some of the really nasty stuff you want to throw out and not put in your compost. And now for pretty pictures. Coming out in perennials, this is Sedum firefrost. It's about 1.5 feet tall, has variegated leaves and a rosy pink flower in August. This is Echinacea. It's a shorter variety, salsa series. There's also a red one and a yellow, I believe, in this series. So these are about 1 foot to 18 inches tall. So if you didn't want to have to stake them. Another perennial sedum, there's a whole Sun Dazzler series. They usually are about 12 inches or shorter, and these are bred for their leaf color. There's this one's red. There's also some tricolored leaf ones and some jade colored leaf and like a chartreuse one. This is a cross. This is Echibeckia, and it's a cross between a coneflower and a black-eyed Susan. Zone hardy for our zone. There's also another color. This one's an orange one, but I think there's a yellow. And this is garden phlox. This one's David's lavender. There's a white one out called David that has shown high mildew resistance, and this is in the same series and supposedly is also as resistant. This is Aurelia Sun King. It's about a 4-foot perennial. It has yellow chartreuse leaves and white plume in June, followed by dark berries. Our native one is called American spikenard. This one's really nice because of the chartreuse leaves. This is a new blueberry out that is not blue. It's pink. And personally, I find it kind of hard because you're not going to know when it's ripe. And this is a new strawberry out called pineberry. And the first time I saw this, I thought it had a disease. This is kalettes. We grew these last year. Did you grow these, Wendy?
No, we didn't.
We grew these last year for the first time. They're a cross between kale and Brussels sprouts. So instead of the tight little Brussels sprouts on the stem, you get this kale rosette. They're really pretty and they're great for a late season crop. And if you like kale or kale chips, it's a good crop.
And when I like Brussels sprouts.
This is Amelanchier standing ovation. It's a new shrub. Amelanchier is serviceberry, so it's a native. This one has a very upright habit, scarlet leaves in the fall, purple berries, and then these white, slightly fragrant flowers. This is a rhododendron, new in this series. And it's like the first really red one that's hardy for our area. And this is a tomato called, it's in the,
What are they called?
it's a purple tomato, indigo series. It has, I don't know if you can see it in this picture, has purple leaves also, and some purpling in the stem. Very tasty. It's not sweet. It's a big, large cherry. When it's ripe, the bottom side is red, the underside. It's red inside. Very tasty. The stems were really thick and seemed to use less staking, and it seemed to be resistant to a late blight. And I think that's it.
So I guess I'm going to talk and then we can do questions for both of us. If that works for people, unless people have stuff they need to ask her before they forget. That was interesting.
It's kind of hodgepodge of everything.
So I'm Wendy Pelte, and I have Tunbridge Hill Farm, and my husband Gene's over there. He's the other half of Tunbridge Hill Farm. And we've been growing vegetables. We have, like the name, it's a hill farm. So we're up on the hill. We have heavy, wet clay soil, and things do really well in it. It really, there's a lot of advantage and disadvantage both ways. I mean, we don't have any irrigation. We've never had any irrigation, and there's been some years where it's been really dry, and we've made it through. Some of the things that I've noticed about, we've been growing there for almost 25 years, and we both worked for this man up in Barry beforehand who is a real... Yeah, Laguerre. Well, actually, it's Alan LePage. It's LePage. Laguerre's up there too. And Alan LePage, he sort of got us into this because he was so passionate about his growing. He was organic before it was even a word. Everybody told him he couldn't possibly grow like that, and so he was really on the cutting edge. And so we worked for him and just got really caught up in the whole. After you taste, hopefully most of you guys are gardeners or you want to be gardeners, but you know when you eat something out of the garden, you can't buy that. You can't buy that in the store. And so the stuff that we've learned that's really changed, I think, is the fact of season extension. And people think, there's this very short season up here, but with season extension, you can eat really well, especially in a year like this where we were picking out Christmas. The neighbors were out there picking Brussels sprouts and at Christmas time. And things that we do for the season extension, it's about warming up the soil. And nobody could have colder soil than we do. I mean, it is clay and it is wet and it is cold. And we raise the beds first of all, and that gives you a lot of benefits because it makes more surface area for the sun to hit, so it's going to warm up. It makes sure that you're not putting your foot right next to where the roots of the plants are, and that's probably the number one thing. The plants do not want to be, you don't want the soil compacted. And the other thing is it just helps it keep well drained. And you don't want, a lot of people, have problems with their gardens, and I look and things are sitting with wet toes, and then, if it's wet, it's cold. And when you talk about temperatures, like she was talking about her seeds, she's warming on her radiant tables, warming things up from underneath. It's not so much the air temperature as the soil temperature, and so it's key to get that soil temperature up as quickly as possible and to keep it warm overnight. So we put plastic over our beds, black plastic, and now there's different color plastics and fancy IRT plastic, which lets more light through. Some weeds can grow under there, but and that anything you can do to push the days is a huge advantage. And we start everything, basically we start in our greenhouse and then we put out there. So then you're jumping the season a little more by not direct seeding. Direct seeding is good in that the plant, if it makes it through and you can really pay attention to it, might do better because the roots aren't ever going to be disturbed. But if you want stuff early, and it's good to get things started early, get the transplants. And if you don't have a good place to start them, it's almost just worth going and buying them, because people with their leggy plants, she didn't tell me. Yeah, like if you plant really leggy, spindly, pale things, and then you feel bad, and everybody feels bad, and we have workers, and I say, don't plant anything in the tray that doesn't look like everything else. Like, I don't care. Like, we're not going to save every plant. If it doesn't look good, you don't put it in your garden. Don't give it the space. Don't feel bad for it. Just put it in the compost and let it recycle back in. But don't plant things that aren't healthy going in. It's just, you're going to attract the insects, you're going to attract the disease, and you're going to put a lot of work into things, and you probably won't get anything out of it. And you get some exercise and fresh air. And that's good. So we start everything, and we don't even have a greenhouse like hers, and that's like greenhouse envy. The table's all like that. We have, our porch off of our old house. We put panels on it and glass windows, and we open the windows that attach to the house, and that's how it's heated. And then we have heat mats, which are important, the heat mats. Really low tech, and we start 5 acres of vegetables in there, and it's probably from here to that shelf. It's very small area, and we have shelves. Really low tech, and it's not the easiest working situation, but it does what we need to do. And we transplant everything except for peas, carrots, mesclun, but we'll transplant our first beets, and that we can get the beets out there, weeks ahead. And it seems tedious. We transplant spinach. We transplant everything, even if they say don't transplant it, like melons and things that don't like their roots touched, we transplant them. So even if they say don't do it, it doesn't mean you can't. It means give it a try. Because you could get a jump on the season. And there's a lot of things people say, don't do that. I always say, what are you gonna lose? A pack of seeds, you know, it's $1.29. You might as well give it a try. If it doesn't work, you know, whatever. And sometimes it's a bad season, so you don't know, but it's worth just trying and seeing if you can get a jump on the season. Like, you have a little warm spell, your soil's dry, put some stuff in, put a row cover over, get your carrots early. Row covers is, everybody should have row covers, even if you don't wanna extend the season that much, because here the nights are cold. They're cold until like the middle of July. I mean, July 4th, there's always, except for last July 4th, there's always a dip in the temperature in July 4th. And we have our row covers on, you know, till about mid-June, on some things even longer, and until they're flowering and the insects really need to get in there. But what the row cover does, and if you're not familiar, you can ask me what it is, but it's this white fabric that the sun can get through, and there's different thicknesses of it. So the thicker, the less, and you can double it, you can triple it, you can get heavier ones. You want to make sure that you have the lightest one on during the day so the sun can get in. But the row cover will keep the night temperatures from going way down, because then the night temperatures go way down, and even if it doesn't freeze, it takes a while before that plant warms up again, and so that's really decreasing it. And I mean, I should take some photos. Sometimes our row cover doesn't go all the way to the end of the row, and there's a few plants sticking out, and those plants that don't have the row cover, some of them don't even make it, but they're so much smaller, whether it's lettuce or a really sensitive plant. They're just so much smaller, and sometimes they're not even marketable. I mean, you could, you know, eat them, but they're not, the quality's not as good. They're not as tender because they're just exposed to the harsh temperatures. And you don't have to do the row covers in the middle of the summer. But the other thing the row cover is good for is insect protection, and especially if you have a small garden and you can really manage it. But we put row covers on one bug that you didn't show, which I'm sure everybody knows, is a cucumber beetle. And that'll just do you right in there. And so when we plant our cucumbers, all the cucurbitas, the melons, the squash, and we transplant those out, even though they say don't transplant those out. We do, because we want to get them in, and we want to get them going, so that if you have that early frost, you don't spend the whole season and then, I mean, last year we did, and last year was beautiful, but if you have that early frost, you get your melons in, you get your winter squash in. We put the row cover over the plant after we transplant, and then the plant grows under the cover, and when it's pushing on the cover, we take the row cover off, and then the plant's strong enough to fend off the cucumber beetles. And same thing, the plants that don't have the row cover blew off, or there's a rip, those plants just get chowed. And especially if they're transplanted, they're stressed, and the bugs come right to them. Like she was saying, anything that's stressed, from water, too much water, or not enough water, and there's a lot of things that can stress the plants. That's what brings in the disease and the insects. I mean, we don't even know how the little vibrations they send off, but once you see it happen a number of times, you realize healthy plants, and sometimes you can't control the weather, You can't control it, and it might dip down, but we usually try to with the row covers. If you have a greenhouse, then you can even control it more. We don't do that. And I think, like I said, if you have a place to start your seeds that's really good, then, that's always going to be the best, because the varieties in the seed catalogs are endless. And one of my things I've noticed that when I first started getting into this is you get your varieties that you like, that work for your spot, that work for your soil, that work for what you want to do with the produce in the end, whether freeze it or eat it or make a certain thing with it. And what you'll notice, and maybe some of you who are big growers will know this, is like every now and then, like you can't get those seeds anymore. And it's a little scary because there's only a few seed companies out there that own most of the seeds, and they're patenting them and they're controlling them. And so the more people that can plant and save seeds and buy from catalogs like Fedco that always buy from growers, and they don't buy from the big seed companies like Monsanto. I just mentioned one that owns, and they own a lot of seed companies that aren't even called Monsanto, but they're, and it's something to be worried about, because it's just a seed, but it's really we're all dependent on it, and we're all, you own the seeds. If somebody owns all the seeds, we're all in trouble in the end. So, I always encourage people to save the seeds and to just support the seed companies. There's Seed Savers Exchange, there's High Mowing, Fedco, Johnny's. There's a lot of good, we're really lucky where we live, there's a lot of good opportunity for buying the seeds, but it's something to be aware of. And I know there's this whole foodie movement and everything, but it hasn't gone the next step back, which is there's not going to be a foodie movement if we don't have the varieties. And that's what the next layer is. Once you cook, that's how I got into it, through cooking. And then I realized, some things taste better, and then I started tasting fresh broccoli as opposed to store-bought broccoli. And I didn't even really like broccoli. And then ate the garden, right out of the garden, and it's a whole nother thing. And I mean, you'll see little kids, that are used to, my daughter, when they grew up eating the vegetables from the garden, and when she was 2, we went to somebody's house and they had a potluck and they had a crudité, and she picked up the broccoli from the crudité, which was store-bought, and put it, up to her mouth like this. And she's like, oh, that's not organic broccoli. And she didn't even taste it. It was a sensation. And they've done it with monkeys in the zoo. They feed them organic bananas, and you try to feed them a non-organic banana. I mean, there's something to it that, there's plants with vitality and I don't know, scary vegetables out there. So that's sort of my passion behind the gardening. And so anybody that gets discouraged, and it can be discouraging. A couple of years ago, it was really discouraging when it rained for 52 days straight. But it's, every year we've survived, and we've been doing it for so long, and every year we've managed to make something out of the garden. So you shouldn't give up, but if you extend your season, it's definitely gonna raise your prospects of getting something out there. And I really love seeing all these people in town that have vegetable gardens, and it's a good thing, because it's always going to be better than even if you buy our stuff. Like, your own stuff is always going to taste better. So anyways, I guess we could open it up to questions. And if people don't have any, I can keep talking. This is my favorite subject. Do you have any variety questions, or?
This isn't a variety question. Well, perhaps it is. I'm just wondering what seeds, for someone that's the first time seed saver, what seeds are the best or most likely to do well and perform well, and what would be the worst? So what we should.
Yeah, and even though that's like my advice, I'm not very good at following my own advice. But some things are easier to save, like tomatoes, because some vegetables you have to separate them, like squash. If you're going to grow out squash for seed, it has to be like half a mile away from any other cucurbita. I mean, or you have to have tents over it, and you have to pollinate it by hand. I mean, it's got to be really controlled. So like squash wouldn't be a good one. If you've ever noticed in your compost pile, when you throw the squash in, you get these random things that grow out, even though you never planted that thing. That's because it's reverting back and it cross-pollinates and, so the seeds to save, they have to be an heirloom, which means that the seed
Or open pollinated.
are open pollinated, that the seeds come true to what you're saving. So if you have a brandywine tomato and you save the seeds, you know, there's 1,000 seeds. You know, most of those seeds will be the plant that the seed came from. In a tomato, you can do that with, and some things like peppers. And I mean, we've saved our garlic seed since we started planting it. There's some things I used to save and then I missed them for a few years, you know, and then I just kicked myself. Like we used to save this really good corn for cornmeal, and then I stopped saving it, and now I can't find it anymore. And if you've ever grown your own cornmeal, and you like cornbread, the way I got to do that was because I ate somebody's cornbread that was grown from corn that they raised. And the key is that when you get cornmeal in the store, they take the fat part out of it because it will go rancid. And so if you grow corn for cornmeal, that variety, and grind it up, it has flavor, because the flavor is always in the fat. And so it just has so much flavor. And also you could let it sit in the pan overnight and it doesn't get all dry. I mean, you'll be a believer after you. And other people have done that. I've passed that on, had people have the cornbread and they're like, oh my God. You know, it's like, so.
Can I just follow up a little bit? Another one to keep is like you can eat like beans. Is good. Even though it's not a seed, keeping in potatoes good for a few years, especially if it's not, it doesn't have disease. Garlic is a good one. We keep our garlic. So those are a few things. And I've never done it, but I heard lettuce seed is fairly viewable in our climate.
I wonder about the dry beans. Can you get them like too dry to, you dry them to cook them and so forth, but are they too dry at that point to plant?
No,
Or is
you
it
can
just fine?
no, it's the same thing, so. Dry beans, she was saying, can you dry beans too much and then not plant them? But dry beans are an excellent thing to save, and that's another thing. Once you save your own beans for drying, and you cook them up, they cook, like you barely have to soak them, and they cook really
15
fast.
minutes in the pressure.
Yeah, and they taste so much better because then you realize, how long have the beans in the store been sitting there?
Exactly.
They're cooking and cooking and cooking, and because usually I would, and that was another thing that I stopped growing out, and I kind of regret it, was these dried beans that we got in France. They made cassoulet with, and so I would just grow them out. We would eat some, and then we'd plant some, but it was the same. I just take them off the shelf, and
No problem.
yeah, each year.
Some peas you can do. I had,
I was given purple peas, and the story behind them was they were descendants of peas that were in King Tut's tomb. This man I was working for, he was the premier gladiola grower, and his friend was Henry Wallace, who was Secretary of Agriculture, and somebody else who was the head of the New York museums. And they were raiding the tombs before Egypt stopped them. And they just packed everything up with what they had there and shipped it back to the museums. And Henry Wallace saw these pea vines with the peas on them and said, oh, I bet you these are viable. And he shipped them off to Lee Fairchild, the man I worked for, who then grew them. And so I have these purple peas I call King Tut's peas. They're beautiful, purple flowers. but they're more of a soup pea. They're not sweet or
Yeah,
anything.
store.
Yeah, and they won a blue ribbon at the fair, and that was before I was the judge.
They're like 5,000 years old.
What's the trick of growing asparagus?
For growing asparagus, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of different. When, do you already have them in the ground?
Yeah, I got a bed that I've had about 5 years now. I just seem to be putting more plants into it. I'm getting out of it.
Uh-huh.
Does it propagate for the roots or?
Yeah, well, they make like this octopus-like root system, and they're gonna send their shoots up from there. The crown
Okay,
is
sure.
underground, and so that would be what you'd call a stem under there. And each frond you see up above, you can pick, and that's gonna encourage more shoots to come up. But you want them to be mature enough before you start harvesting.
Oh, there's, oh, yeah.
So, once I have a bed that's, God, 20 years old. And so I'll start harvesting that as soon as I start seeing the shoots coming up, and I can harvest that right through 4th of July and still have it grow. So you want to stop if they're new. You don't want to keep picking and picking. You want to pick a little and then let it grow, because those are going to photosynthesize and send more energy down to
Are
the
they-
base.
Is there a male and female plant?
There are male and female plants. Males tend to have a larger shoot. The females, you'll see they'll get the red berries.
Oh, yeah.
So they also get attacked by the asparagus beetle. Usually doesn't do too much damage. Well, it depends on when the beetle emerges, actually. So I don't know if you have any.
Okay,
Nope.
good, yeah, thank you.
Yes.
What's your favorite vegetable?
My favorite vegetable is
Is what?
green beans, green peas. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Green arrows?
Green arrow. That's my favorite pea.
Do you think that's
My favorite vegetable, well, it changes. Goes from like the sugar snaps piece, which, and then you eat too many of them. Then it goes to the first tomato, and then it goes to the melon. So I think it depends what you haven't overeaten out of the garden. But you kind of have to do that, because then it's going to be a whole nother year before they come around again, and you forgot eating too many peas.
Is there any practical way to get rid of wire worms without poisoning the land? What I've done is bait them with an extra row of potatoes or something and hope they go there. But they've just about put me out of the gardening business.
You can try beneficial nematodes. You're gonna have to. Usually they come as a dust,
Yeah.
and you wet it and water them into your soil. I can see if there's other.
With that spinosad.
The problem is you'd have to have contact with it, with the wireworm itself, and they're pretty.
Pretty elusive.
Yeah. Because the spinosad's not going to stay in your soil, because your soil's going to be moist and breathing, and it's going to dissipate pretty quickly. Whereas if you sprayed it on a leaf and the insect ingested it, it's going to affect them.
Okay. I understand the problem is that the land there's too much organic matter in it. That's where the fireworms thrive. So, I overdid the organic.
Well, you're going to have a lot of beneficials in that organic
Yeah.
also, so it just sounds like you're a little out of balance.
I am.
The nematodes might work, because we've used them on our onion maggots, and it was almost like a miracle, because you can't even, you spray them, in water, you can't even see anything, and you've spent all this money on them, and you're like, okay, and
And
we
you put it on after you till the soil in the spring?
There's
Or
pretty,
anytime.
yeah, the soil's gotta be warm enough, and they don't like the light. Well, the ones we were using for the onions, they don't like light, so you had to either do it on a rainy day or
At the end
at
of,
the end of the day, and the soil needed to be wet. So you had to get everything to line up. But they're really, really effective, and they just go off and do their things, and they actually get rid of a lot of other problems. So as you're rotating your garden around, like, the brassicas won't have the problems later, so that, but there's specific nematodes for specific things, so you gotta talk to the people who you're buying it from.
Thank you.
Does everybody here have a vegetable garden? Raise your hand if you have a vegetable garden. Okay, that's good. That's good.
This is something to do with, so.
It is.
Yeah.
I know. I'm always like, just go outside 15 minutes a day.
Wendy, talk about squash borers, would you?
The squash borer, yeah, last year they weren't a problem.
No, they weren't.
That was nice, and the year before they were a problem.
Yes.
And so that's, in general, things are cyclical, and you
the
probably,
weather last summer had a lot to do with their low population. So, we had a beautiful May, and, but then June was kind of wet and cold, which slows down a lot of soil dwelling insects cycles. And then it kind of warmed up, but then it got really hot, which desiccates a lot of soil dwelling insects. So it actually was like the perfect confluence to not get a giant population of squash bugs.
it was nice.
So are you predicting another year
Another
like
year
this,
like
so we
that?
don't have squash
If
borers?
you grow in November,
We've never had them before 2 years ago.
And they wiped out the entire crop.
And pumpkins.
yeah, it was apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And I think, what I've seen is that things like that come in, and they're, every now and then you get those really heavy populations, and they kind of cycle in like the tomato hornworms. I mean, we got infested with those a few years ago, and I thought, but now they're under control. And so things, and flea beetles, one year the flea beetles were so bad they were going under the row covers. There was nothing we could do, and then they kind of settle back. So sometimes it's just a cyclical thing, and it's like, that's why you gotta plan a lot of stuff, because it's always a good year for something. Squash gets wiped out, you eat potatoes all winter.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is just something I've been thinking about. Have you ever added earthworms to your garden? To help kind of
Earthworms,
earthworms?
adding earthworms. We have so many worms in our garden that we've never had to add any. In fact, when you walk out in the morning, you can hear them. And they're just sucking themselves back into the holes. I mean, as you're walking. It's a crazy thing, but maybe you know something about
Earthworms are considered beneficial. So if you do not have earthworms in your garden, yes, add them. What they do is they're recycling organic matter. They're taking in organic matter, breaking it down further, and what they excrete is nutritional for your plants. They
I
also-
actually add leaves to my garden, like maple leaves and stuff like that, and fill it in, so the earthworms would actually have something to eat. So that's kind of what I do.
And you see worms there?
So, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have worms, that's a sign something's not right.
Okay,
Dave mentioned leaves. Are there some leaves that are better than others to use for mulch?
If you're gonna use leaves, I would chop them up. Because if you can recognize it as a whole leaf, if you can go, oh, there's maple tree. It's gonna take longer to break down, and typically when something's breaking down, it's restricting nutrient flow, tying it up. So the faster that material breaks down, the faster nutrition is gonna get to your plant. Yes.
But what about tilling? Do you recommend tilling in the fall? Tillage?
There's a couple schools of thought on that. If you're in a place that's gonna erode, I would not till in the fall. What you can do is a green manure crop and then till it in the spring. And as a green manure crop, that's what's out there. For the fall, it would be winter rye. And you might have to mow it before you till it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, some people, they want their garden to be all pristine in the fall. And a lot of times, we just leave what's there because it does hold the soil. And I've noticed that if we do till, because we might have been prepping something late, the soil the next spring is really more compacted. You know, I've noticed that the less you touch it, you know, the better. And there's,
So, you know, the stuff that's left on top, does it help break it down if you bury it?
you mean the
Yeah,
plant matter?
vegetation, Plant matter, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna break down faster if you bury it. I mean, if you've got a lot of big stuff, I guess, and you have a small garden, you might wanna pull that out, but not till the soil in. Like, really, the less tilling, the better.
Okay.
Of course, like, we do a lot of tilling, because we're constantly trying to prep our soil, and it's impossible to do by hand on our size, but even if you do like a disc, or anytime you can just not till it.
Yeah, I've heard you can till too deep and destroy the inoculate still, you germinate seed.
Yeah, and you can also create a hard pan, so like if your soil's like here, and then this is a layer of clay, you till, and then this gets really hard. And if you notice, like, your carrots are sort of funky, or your beets aren't doing well, there's certain things that have very long tap roots. And if you have a hard pan, the root isn't gonna be able to get through. And there's a lot of nutrients down there too that, you know, they need to get to. So if you think, or if you've had heavy equipment driving around your yard, and then you put a garden in, that there could be a hard pan. You want to get in and break that up, you know, with a shovel or something, just so that the roots can get down
You gotta
there.
break it up and get to that hard bed.
Yeah.
You should,
Yeah,
yeah. I get about 6 inches, I got hard bed, yeah.
yeah, and that's going to cause a lot of problems.
I mean, the old carrots over had to go at all.
Yeah,
And of course, the above ground crop, green crop go fine, but
yeah, the hard pans.
Yeah.
It's a problem for our soil. I don't know,
Yeah.
did you have a problem?
I'll say very.
I mean, you know how you said, well, you know, they tell you not to do something, and I agree that tilling in the fall is probably not the best practice, but if you do have a little patch that will not erode, if you till in the fall, one of the benefits is that it'll warm up, especially if you have a raised bed, it'll warm up faster in the spring because the soil's black, and it'll absorb all this heat, and you'll have your bed earlier, ready to go earlier. You know, for your early little patch in your garden, there is a place for
Microgreens.
fall tilling.
Yeah. Yeah, but the hard pan, I mean, actually, people don't like dandelions in their garden, but their taproot, you probably don't like it.
I love
Okay.
dandelions. I may went with dandelions.
Oh, yeah.
They're beneficial.
Okay. Dandelions, their taproot will break that up. So if I see dandelions, I like them too, because it means their taproot's going down and it's breaking up the hard pan, and they bring up a lot of nutrients.
Alfalfa roots will go very deep too.
Alfalfa roots, burdock, I don't really like burdock, but their roots will go down so there are some, and milkweed, their root will go down too, although that's not really a good soil indicator if you have milkweed, but dandelion's a good soil, you'll have good rich soil if you have dandelions, so.
Yeah, but we eat them.
And you eat
Eat
them.
them, and they're one of the first things to bloom.
Yeah.
Do you recommend plowing up a garden every so often, just plow it over, just to roll the soil over?
No, mainly because of that hard pan thing. And if your garden's really big and plowing's is a good solution, but if you don't ever have to plow, if you can just go and put,
Top first.
something on top to get rid of the sod, like cover it, I always tell people, cover it in the fall with a piece of plastic and weigh it down, kill off the sod. And if you never have to plow, it's actually better.
Well, the old saying is, if you plow a garden over, you're gonna have less weeds.
Bless.
Because it's taking everything and putting it down under.
Weeds.
So if you plow it, you end up with less weeds.
If you plow, you bury all the bacteria.
Yeah,
You'll be delayed, how's that? You're also bringing up seeds that have been dormant and now are going, oh my God, I'm on top. And they'll start to germinate. It's usually a lot of your annuals. If you didn't bury your perennial weeds deep enough, they will also find their way to the top. So it's nice if it's a sod layer.
No, I'm
And
not talking about a garden, I'm not talking about the perennial garden. I'm talking about the regular garden, the vegetable garden. I feel if you turn the soil over, you're gonna get less weeds. And it's easy to work. And I think sometimes, in my opinion, you're better off to turn the soil over once in a while. That's what I do.
The benefits of turning, so there's, you gotta kind of weigh it out,
Yeah.
because there's the erosion factor, there's compaction. Turning the soil over or rototilling it, you are interrupting a lot of germination cycles. So you're gonna, if you till every once in a while or just go through with a tine, you're gonna break up some germination cycle of weeds. If you've had a bad insect infestation and they are ground dwellers, rototilling disrupts their cycle. So that's one way to kind of slow down or manage a pest. What happens if you over rototill is you kind of destroy your soil structure and you kind of break down your organic matter a little too quickly. And so it's less optimal for your plant to grow in.
Yes.
What do you add to your soil every year, and how much?
To my soil at my house, my garden, I add an organic fertilizer called ProGrow, and yes, we sell that. It breaks down more slowly. It's not a high nitrogen, high phosphate. It's a little bit more balanced, and it can be generally broadcast on shrubs, my fruit trees, and my vegetable garden. Also, I throw down a layer of compost on my vegetable garden. If I have extra, I'll do it on my blueberries and apple trees.
We get manure from our neighbor. He's got an organic dairy farm, and every year, depending on what crop it is, we do usually it's like we have part of the pile from the year before. So put that down, and then we use that ProGrow. So the manure is is sort of like the long release, like it's there for the long term. The ProGrow is kind of a little bit quicker, the plant can access it. And there's also a Pro Start, which is more for roots. And then we do, when we transplant in, we do fish emulsion. So we water all the plants in with fish emulsion, and it's kind of like the watering in will help get rid of the plant transplant shock, but that fish emulsion they can take up really quickly, and and help them get over the transplant shock. And is there anything? Oh, and then we add phosphate rock, right? But that's like once every 10 or 15 years. We spread phosphate rock.
Right, and they don't recommend it anymore, like I said, they're,
Concerned about,
trying to weed
runoff.
us away from it. And they've also seen that the manure-based fertile management system, you actually build up phosphates anyway, so we used to add phosphate rock, but we don't anymore.
Which was a very slow releasing phosphate. Yeah, so we don't, we have pretty good soil. I mean, it's actually really nice soil where we are, and
After 25 years,
well, it was actually nice when we got there. We were lucky, it was a beautiful clover field, so, it was a nice piece of land, so we're trying to just keep it that way. So it depends too, and you can tell a lot by what weeds are growing, There's, some weeds that tend towards, like she was talking, the more acidic things. So if you kind of see what's growing there naturally, you can kind of see if your soil is too far one way or the other. You kind of get a feel for it after a while, and what plants are growing just on their own.
Do dandelions, they like acidic soil or alkaline soil?
They like just really good soil.
Oh, yeah, I know, but acidic or alkaline?
They'll actually grow anywhere. You're an opportunist. Yeah, they would prefer to be in like a 6.5, so it's sort of in the middle there.
Yeah, okay.
But they'll grow way on the acidic side, and they'll grow way on the alkaline side also.
They grow pretty good right up there.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Any thoughts on urine?
Urine?
Yeah.
As in,
As in, I've been hearing a lot lately about fertilization.
using,
high nitrogen.
like urine,
Like
or?
peeing on your berry bushes.
The question was, what about urine? And I assume, the problem with urine is you don't know the pH of it. Too high, as you'll see with such as dog urine, you'll get the brown spots on your lawn because the nitrogen was too high and it just burnt the bejesus out of the grass. So your own urine could range in pH all over the place. I hate adding something when you don't really know what the makeup is and how long it's going to take to release.
We've been broadcasting on this one section of the meadow outside of the house, from the night jar. We compost our waste, and the urine just gets broadcast out there. And it's the most lush, I mean, it is amazing what happened in that area. And now I'm hearing, even municipal systems, trying to separate out the urine and actually use it for fertilization. I know it works well for us.
I think there's a group in Brattleboro that's pushing this idea that say separate the sewage. And in 1968, 69, I went to a resort called Vietnam, and they really know how to raise food over there. And maybe we should think about listening to those people. They've been there for 6,000 years. Their land is in much better shape than it could have been when they found it. And every morning from the villages come the men with their ditty buckets and carrying it out to the farms and putting it on the plants. And one trick I learned from him that applies, it can be used here, I use it, is when they plant a row of vegetables, they will, 6 or 8 inches away, they will plant another row like a month later. And by the time they're harvesting this one, this second row is ready to pop. It's very labor intensive because you can't use equipment, you can't use heavy equipment. But, you know, when you think about what we do in this country, we mine the land for 1,000 miles around us and bring the food into the megalopolises like New York and Boston. And then when they're done with the nutrients, it goes out to sea. It's not put back on the land where it came from. How long can you keep that up? You know, someday it's gonna run out, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, no,
I told you I was unbalanced when I came.
No, he was, I don't know if everybody heard that, but he was talking about, like staggering your plantings too. And that it's, I mean, in our business, it's a good thing. Like once we start lettuce, we plant it every week. And I know a lot of home gardeners will plant their lettuce and they'll try to just keep eating it all summer long, and then they'll wonder why their kids don't like lettuce. It's because it gets really bitter. And some things are good, you know, there's some like the Andai family, they're bitter, but like bad bitter is not good. So if you keep planting things in succession, there's a lot of crops, even cucumbers you can do succession crops on. There's a lot of crops you can do successions on. And then, yeah, just keep eating it. You know, it's a little bit more work, but you get better quality. Spinach, mesclun, you know, the arugula, and you get those baby tender things right away. Beets, keep doing successions on. Carrots.
Green beans.
String
Greens. Oh yeah, definitely the beans. You don't want the tough ones.
No.
So, I don't know if anybody here has like a secret that they want to share. There's probably a lot of gardening experience.
One thing, there was a question earlier about discussion about leaves, and you mentioned chopping them up, and I think it was 2 years ago, I looked at the price of a bale of straw, and I thought, gosh, I've got all these leaves, you know, and what do I want to put on my garlic? And I actually called into the Charlie Nardoni's show and said, you know, you say mulch your garlic with straw, but, you know, how would leaves work? And he said, yeah, you could try it. You know, yeah, that'll work. And so what I do is just use a mower, you know, put the bag on the mower and do maybe one extra, you know, lawn mowing at the end of the year, and it chops it up really good. I've done it, it actually might have been 3 years at this point. Well, 3 years counting what I just did, but has worked really well, and that soil is just, you know, it's a nice cover. It's a little bit of grass clippings in with the leaves, and it has just, you know, what is underneath has just turned into some very nice fluffy soil.
I'll second that.
Garlic seems to like it. Yeah.
I do that too.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I know all these people hauling their leaves away.
Right.
Taking them to the dump. Yeah.
Like, quit.
I just heard the other day that apple a day keeps the doctor away, garlic will take care of everybody else.
I have 2 handouts up here if anybody wants any. One is best plants for butterflies, and the other is best plants for bees. If you're interested, take them away.
If you have other questions, you can definitely, we can hang out, talk to Eileen and Wendy, talk to each other. It sounds like it's a lot of knowledge pooled in one place. And before you leave, remember there are refreshments. If you're willing to pick up your chair, if you feel like you can do that, fold it up and just put it to the side. That would be a great help. Don't fold the sofa. But I want to thank you all for coming, and thank Wendy and Eileen very much.